that is actually being violated. And along with this point, we're going to look at what that standard might be. This is just the main idea here, that only God could possibly satisfy the requirements for that standard, and we'll see why shortly. So let's think about what are the options for making up, for morality and whatever. And the first option is, well, make it up ourselves. It's our own truth, our own moral truth. And each person has their own moral truth. But that doesn't actually work in reality, and here's why. Consider a group of children, and you send them out to play at recess time, and you say, you guys want to play a group game out there, and here's the thing. Each person makes their own rules for this game, okay? So you got like 35 kids out there playing. Each kid is making up their own rules. How is that going to work? Like, how well will that work? I think it's not going to work very well at all. And especially if one kid start complaining about other kids cheating. How could you possibly cheat? Because by your rules, maybe he's cheating, but by that kid's rules, that's part of the game. That's that's good rules. He's doing what he ought to. So the point here is that if morality, if the moral code or what is being violated is something that originates from within the individual, it's not going to work at all, and it certainly doesn't work to complain about all the stuff going on in this world. So we either have to shut up and sit down when it comes to complaining about what other people are doing, or we have to acknowledge that there's something higher than just the individual, and by that standard, some people come closer to that standard than others, and some people are pretty far away from that standard. So we're just reasoning our way through, and keep in mind, I'm a philosopher, and I like to reason through stuff. That's what philosophers do. And I'm taking you with the reasoning process of how to figure this out. So we're not just asserting that there is a higher standard. We look around and we say to that other person, look, you just complained about what that guy's doing over there. But against what standard? Like, what's your standard of reference? And sometimes it helps to ask questions. What are you comparing that person with? Is it with your own standard? But what if by their standard, that's the good thing to do? So, a lot of times the ground can be gained a lot by asking the right questions. In fact, here's a little tip my trainer gave me when I first went into ministry. He said, Kirk, there is the art of asking the right question. And the right question is carefully thought through, and it's the kind of question that will actually accomplish something. It'll either show the weakness in the other person's argument, or it will get a point across, but it'll be the person answering that does the work. Just ask the right question. Now that is an art, and I have worked at that for years, and I would not claim to be an expert yet in the art of asking the right question, but at least if you become conscious that you can often accomplish a lot by asking the right question. So, takeaway, just as we cannot complain about cheating unless there's some existing rules that are being broken that are higher than the individual children out there, we cannot meaningfully talk about evil and injustice unless there's a standard of perfection and beauty that is being violated. By the way, I just want to point out the anchor notes up there. That's a folder, and all of these slides are in there, but I put 8 slides per page, so you don't have a whole pile of pages. 8 slides per page, and that's for the whole week. So if it can't be individual, then what could it be? Moral evolution. Maybe that did it. So let's take a look at evolution. If morality is a product of our evolutionary history, then it should be encoded in our genes. We should not have to teach it. When we had 6 kids, I did not have to teach them how to grow a head and arms and fingers. Did not have to teach them how to breathe or fill their diaper. That was all in their genes. So if morality is a product of evolution and it's all biological process, then it has to be in our genes. But if you've ever worked with children, and we observed in our own kids, we did not have to teach them how to lie or how to hit one another. We didn't have to teach them that. We didn't have to teach them how to take each other's toys. This just came natural. We not to hit one another, not to take each other's toys, to be considerate, and so forth. And so what my point is that it's not in our genes. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite of morality. We just become like animals, competing with one another, intimidating one another, taking each other's stuff. The fittest and the strongest, the most intimidating, gets the biggest share. That's the way the animal kingdom, even in the higher animals, dogs, dolphins, there's still that pecking order there, and the pecking order is established by intimidation and, if necessary, violence. Cattle, grew up with cattle. You think cows are nice and peaceful, eh? Well, you put a strange cow into the herd, immediately there's a bunch of pushing and shoving and do a pecking order by the top cows to make sure that this new stranger knows their place. And that's cows, peaceful, hay-munching cows. So it can't be morality, and I almost never agree with Richard Dawkins. But Richard Dawkins, I agree with him here, and I love that he said this. He says, I shall argue that a predominant quality to be expected in a successful gene is ruthless selfishness. Be warned that if you wish, as I do, to build a society in which individuals cooperate generously and unselfishly toward a common good, you can expect little help from biological nature. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Born selfish. The interesting thing about Dawkins is he has there's no standard to point to. He doesn't think that far ahead. He's not a philosopher. By the way, by evolutionary standards, the most successful man that we're aware of that ever lived, that is the man who was able to pass his genes on to more people than anybody else has been able to do it, is Genghis Khan. And there's a couple of peer-reviewed papers in science journals that talk about what percentage of the world's population today carry Genghis Khan's Y chromosome. But National Geographic had a nice article, big article on Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan did not live a very moral life, according to what we think is kind and considerate. He would go to a city. There's one city he's killed 1 million people, they estimate, piled the bodies into one gigantic pile in front of the city. He's famous for some quotes, and some of his quotes said that one of his favorite things to do is well, it's with women, let's put it that way. And that's why his genes are carried by more men today, particularly in Asia and West Asia into Ukraine, Poland, Russia, and then down throughout, even into the Middle East. So that can't possibly be the solution for morality. And you can just point that out. And if you want to find those peer-reviewed papers, ChatGPT is your friend. It's good for finding peer-reviewed papers, but make sure you check out those suggestions that it makes, because you might embarrass yourself. Well then, if it's not the individual, by the way, questions? Does it all make sense so far? Okay, just ram your hand into the sky if you have a question. If it's not the individual, and if it's not evolution that produces over centuries and millennia this morale, what is it? Could it be our society? So it is true that our society makes up its rules too. Individuals make up their rules, but our society does as well. And one of the major theories of ethics is called contractarianism. It's kind of an unspoken, unspoken, unwritten moral standard that we just sort of pick up by osmosis, whereby we can all get along together. So somehow you all arrive from all over the place, North America, Canada, US, and looks to me like you're getting along together. And that would be an example of social contract. Now, not necessarily, I think you're getting along together for other reasons besides just that. So that's one of the things. Then there's another theory of ethics and morality. It's called utilitarianism. And this is where, this takes a little more intentionality, but you draft a set of rules that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people, but unfortunately often at the expense of the individual. And this would be the kind of theory that, say, China, communism, Soviet Union, China, This is that kind of rule. And often the individual is left in the dust for the better of the masses. Now, the problem here with this, it's a genuine, is that we believe that some societies are better than other societies. Even in communism, we look at communist societies, some of those societies seem to be less harsh than others, or better than others. And so that itself is not possible unless there is a standard that is even higher than the individual, higher than individual civilizations, so that by that standard you can say this society comes closer to that standard than that one over there. So when you're discussing this with your friends, you're not claiming there is one, you're saying, look, if we're going to be consistent, if we're actually going to talk as if it's actually meaningful, when we're complaining about all the heinous stuff going on in this world, and not just be talking nonsense, then there has to be some standard of perfection and beauty that's being violated, and it's higher than civilizations, because we can say some civilizations are better than others, and we think we're not talking nonsense here. So here's C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. The moment you say that one set of moral ideas could be better than another, you are, in fact, measuring them both by a standard, saying that one of them conforms to that standard more nearly than the other. You are, in fact, comparing them both with some real morality, admitting there is such a thing as real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to that real right than others. So what is the standard? Well, let's put our minds to this problem. Let's just think about this. First of all, we observe that moral laws are only useful to minds capable of moral deliberation. So they're not useful to rocks and chairs and tables and planets. They're not useful to those things because those things don't have a mind capable of moral deliberation. Thinking about what's right, what's wrong. So because, that's the first thing. So what is the best explanation? We're looking now, we're sort of granting that there might be a standard out there, unless we're all talking nonsense about justice and evil. There must be a standard out there, but that standard is only useful. This isn't like the laws of nature anymore. We're not talking gravity. Law of gravity is useful to apples falling out of trees and all sorts of things that have no minds whatsoever. But this is a totally different kind of law. And the best explanation for that source is that it must be a mind itself, something that's only useful to minds. Where does it come from? Well, it must come from a mind itself, as opposed to just mindless natural processes. So that we're trying to figure out where this comes from. Second, since the ultimate moral laws must be perfect, the most likely source is a maximally excellent mind. And maximal excellence is a term that the philosopher Alvin Plantinga came up with. And what it means, it's that degree of excellence beyond which it's not logically possible to be even more excellent still. So it has to come. And why do we say a perfect one? Well, let's just imagine that some space aliens landed on the Earth and they were really good. They were really impressive in their morality. But they just had one, say, moral law that you looked at and you said, no, that's not perfect. They have this problem over here. The problem might be taking over planets, wiping out the inhabitants and populating them themselves. And we might have a problem with that because here we are, they're wiping us out. But everything else is really good. So the only way you can even say they're not perfect, the phrase they aren't perfect, there's a problem here, is if there is actually a higher standard still that is perfect, and by that standard, all these space aliens landing here, they're not perfect. They don't have a perfect moral law. So we can't really escape that ultimately, we're all talking nonsense here, unless there is an imperfect moral law, then you can't even say it's imperfect if there's no higher law to judge it against. So this source must be maximally excellent. It's a mind, it's maximally excellent, and moral laws, do I not say this somewhere? No. Well, I would also say that it's only useful to beings with free will. Like, if you don't have any free will, what's the point of a moral law? Like, if you put a sign up in the that rule to the apples. They have no choice. The branch lets go, they hit the ground. There's no need for a sign in the apple orchard that requires that all apples must hit the ground. Same with all the moral laws that we have. Those are absolutely useless if our decisions are completely determined. They're only useful to things with free will, but then we're faced with what's the best explanation for that? If it's fine-tuned and honed and designed to be used by minds that have free will, then the best explanation for where this came from is that it also comes from a mind with free will, but not just any mind. It has to be a maximally excellent mind. So, what would that? Why am I going to suggest God here? Because of something that it says in James. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. Focus on that. Every perfect gift and good thing. What that means is that I took this photo on that camp that I Coon, I was wearing a shirt yesterday, Patty, I went out canoeing one evening. That's beauty. There's beauty there. But God is the origin of beauty. He is the origin of music and art and honor and love. And every good thing given, that's what it's saying here, comes from the Father of lights. In other words, he isn't just beautiful, he is the origin of beauty. And he is beauty personified, love personified. God is music personified. Now, as C.S. Lewis points out in his book, Screwtape Letters, we can warp, twist, misuse it, wreck it, whatever we want. We can do lots of stuff with the good things that's not good, but the origin of these things. So just think about this for a second. If God were to, let's say, excuse me, if the God, let's say God is love. So love walked into this room right now. We're not just talking to somebody who has love, but we're talking the origin of love. Love personified. All the love in the universe owes its existence from this one being. That one being walked into the room right now. What would that experience be like? Same with beauty. What if beauty, I mean, I find it hard enough to handle some of the beautiful things I see in nature without wanting to just yell or scream or something. But what would it be like if all the beauty in the universe was condensed down into 1 cubic yard and sat on that table there? We would all just kind of, I think we'd just be blown away. Like, we couldn't handle that degree of beauty, but that's not God. That just came from the one who is the origin of beauty. So this is one of my favorite descriptions of God in the Bible. So when I'm talking to people about God, I like to mention this because they think organized religion and old man with a beard, sitting on a cloud or something. Just really underestimate God. But if this is the case, that God himself becomes that maximally excellent being, and therefore the origin or that standard of perfection and beauty and love and honor and justice and music, and that we can look at and say, there's perfection there. And now we know that some things come closer to that standard than others, and that's one of the objectives of the Christian life, is to become closer and closer to that, the one who is all of these things, the Father of lights. So here's a little syllogism here. If God does not exist, then there is no real evil. And the rationale before that is what we saw. I mean, it's all just nonsense. We think these things in our head. We can solve the problem with evil and say, well, that's not evil after all. It's not evil. So if God does not exist, there's no real evil. But real evil exists. At least we talk as if it is real. It's not just my imagination. But if that's the case, therefore, God does exist. And if God does exist, then we have an ultimate standard here. So the takeaway for part one is that whenever you get involved in a conversation about someone saying, I don't believe in God because of all evil and injustice, you can point out that we cannot escape the need for a perfectly good God if we're to talk meaningfully about evil and injustice. And it's not just nonsense. Every violation of justice and perfection actually is an argument or points to the existence of God. It's exactly the opposite of what the most powerful argument against the existence of God, so it is thought, is the problem of evil and injustice in the world. That's the atheist number 1 absurd to complain about a high crime rate on some island in the South Pacific if in fact there's no laws in existence to break. So if you're going to talk about evil and injustice, you have to start talking about what that standard is. Any questions before I move into part 2? You may have to review the notes, think about this, but you can actually use instances of evil to ask the person what you think was violated here, where does that come from? So it's easy to say there is no God at first. In fact, C.S. Lewis says it's easy to say that until you start thinking about, well, but there is real justice. Then it's not so easy anymore. Okay, well, let's just take a quick look here at the track record of atheist societies. And these are societies where atheism was a core value in the 20th century. And what we're looking at here is responding to that accusation that religion has killed more people than anything else in history. I've heard it a lot. So let's define an atheist society where atheism is a core value. And we're just going to look at the 20th century. And what that means, atheism was strongly promoted by the government. In many cases, that's an understatement. It was enforced and imposed by the government. It was relentlessly taught in schools. And forget about passing if you don't sign off on atheism bit. And it was incorporated into public policies and decisions. So that would be a definition of an atheist society. And so let's just see what the track record is. First of all, I didn't have that here, but there's a sociologist, a political scientist actually, at the University of Hawaii by the name of Rudolph Rummel. I think he's retired now, but he has a website with his whole life work all there. He's been nominated for Nobel Prize and a bunch of other prizes, and he's won awards for his work on what? Mass killing. That's his area of specialty, especially mass killing by governments. That's where his expertise is. But he also has mass killing for other things like witch trials, Inquisition, the Crusades. So when you take his figures, and he has we don't know in some case, for the Inquisition, they kept meticulous records, so we know those numbers. Pretty much plus or minus 5 or 6 people. We know those numbers. And it's not very many compared to other things. And then you have the Crusades, he has an upper lower limit, and then you have the witch burnings, which people really pull up the stops there. Wow, they killed millions and whatever. But he has very, very carefully and his work is peer reviewed, and the approximate number of people killed, and this is not the lower level or the higher level, but this is going into the higher level of his estimates, through witch burnings, the Crusades, and the Inquisition, is approximately 1 million people. 1.2, somewhere in there. 1 million to 1.2 million people killed, so-called, in the name of religion. Okay. Now, the Crusades, they were all done by Christians. There was Christians and Muslims involved in that. But let's just say, in the name of religion, 1.2 million people killed over all of our recorded history, roughly. So what does an atheist society, how does that stack up? And here's how it stacks up. China, under the Mao Soviets, killed 3.4 million. Already we got 3 times as many people just killed in a period of a few years under the Mao Soviets. Then, under the People's Republic of China, he has documented, and it's been heavily, I've read some of the discussion here because as I say, the current Chinese government really doesn't appreciate his work because they're complicit in this. But it's 76 million people, just of their own people. This isn't a war of somewhere killing somebody else, their own people. USSR is almost 62 million. And when you add those figures up, and I haven't even talked about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, which is roughly 2 million, North Korea, roughly another 2 million. But not talking about those, let's just take the big ones here. Total is 142 million people killed just in the 20th century by atheistic societies where atheism was a core belief enforced and imposed and so on and so forth. That means that it has killed 100 times as many people as organized religion. A colleague of mine has done, he's got a whole pile of episodes, YouTube live stream episodes where we discuss this. That's his area of specialty, and I'm asking him to, let's break this down into articles that people can, we'll put it as your guest lecture on my website and you can download this stuff. This isn't just Christians saying this. There's some non-Christian very reputable scholars at an academic level that have done the research as well, and they say actually, not religion necessarily all by itself, but Christianity, and one of the guys is an atheist or a non-Christian, is probably the best thing that ever happened to human civilization in terms of flourishing, altruism, helping people get along, and all these sorts of things. So why is that? So an absolute moral laws are like a guardrail that are not attached to you, like you don't make up your own rules, or society doesn't make up your own rules. They're anchored to the one, the Father of lights. So they're like a guardrail solidly attached, preventing us from wandering over the moral precipice, like that picture there. See the post solidly attached to the path. And so that if you do wander, say it's a dark and foggy night, you can't see, and it's pitch dark, and you still hit the guardrail, and it'll keep you from plunging over the precipice. But moral relativism, that is, if society or individuals make up their own rules, it's like a guardrail that they carry in their hands. And it doesn't work too well on a dark and stormy night if you're on a path like this. If they just have a guardrail at all, they just hand it out a guardrail and carry it as you're on the walkway. That's exactly what any human-based morality is like. And it fails to stop the swing of the pendulum to the extremes that are sad fact of human history. And the only thing that seems to moderate the extreme swings of the pendulum, according to these academics who this is their area of specialty, is people who believe that their morality is anchored in God himself, especially Christians, where the standard is love your neighbor as yourself. So that completes part one. Any questions before we head into part two? Okay, so part two is, I want to look at why we have no clue, no idea at all what God should and should not allow in this world. And so you see that little droplet falling down? Plop. And that droplet moves a lot of other droplets. And that's kind of the idea behind here. This is what I did my master's thesis on, and I published a few papers in secular philosophy journals. And so you can know that what I'm telling you here actually went through secular peer review, this next section here. So, and you can download those papers if you want. That also is on my website. And here's why. Because every event in this world, every event, it doesn't matter how small, even the vibration of a particular electron on some planet in another galaxy, every event produces consequences, and those consequences begin to spread out down the causal chain. But causal chains of events don't evolve all in isolation. Each one of you can represent a causal chain, your decisions and how that influenced something else you did and so forth. But your decisions and what you do also influence somebody else. And then that continues to increase exponentially. So every event multiplies into the future, affecting an exponentially increasing number of events and causal chains. And here's an example. So Sir Winston Churchill was Prime Minister of England during World War II and during the Battle of Britain. And he made decisions that within hours affected thousands and within a day or two affected millions. He made decisions. And eventually, because the interesting thing is that the decisions that Winston Churchill had made then has affected every one of you, and chances are, if Winston Churchill had not existed, neither would anybody in this room exist. And here's why. Because every conception event has millions of genetic possibilities. Every one of them. Like, it's just, every one of us won the lottery big time when we got conceived. Because there was millions of other possibilities, all possible at that event. And so, let's go back to the night that Sir Winston Churchill was conceived. If on the night he was conceived, Lady Randolph Churchill had fallen asleep in a slightly different position, then a different genetic combination would almost certainly have resulted. In which case, a different Churchill would have been conceived, not be the Prime Minister of England, not be Winston, and the course of World War II, which was nothing to do with them, had started by Adolf Hitler over there. The course of World War II would have been a lot different. the point is that when we're figuring out what God should and should not allow, it's not just big events, and it's not just bad events, it also has to be good events. And then there's events that we think have no moral significance whatsoever, like whatever position Lady Randolph Churchill fell asleep that night that Winston was conceived. You would say, if you didn't know anything else about this, and you have a reporter and say, oh, look, she's fallen asleep in that position there right now, should God have allowed that? They would look at you and say, oh, you lost your mind, but there's no moral significance to this. Ah, yes, but genetic combinations are being determined here. The future of the child is being determined, which means the future of everyone that child will affect, and someday one of those combinations become prime minister, affect millions, and then ultimately billions of people. So if you actually adjust history by only a few seconds either way, then because those are millions of genetic possibilities, somebody else gets born instead of you. Somebody else gets conceived instead of you. And the decisions that Churchill made had a huge effect on how world history has evolved since then. Would my father have met my mother? I don't know. I know that a lot of people were killed in World War II who otherwise would have lived and maybe not lived, and it just goes on and on. And you're aware of this if you've read science fiction. You might have heard of the butterfly effect. I started watching that movie once, though. That was heinous. I'm not watching this one. But the real butterfly effect that was written by, I think, Ray Bradbury is a sci-fi. Totally different. It has nothing to do with the movie. Guy steps on an insect back in the time of the dinosaurs and radically changes the world future history. So I want to just give you an idea of how difficult it is to determine the moral value of an event, because the moral value of an event is not just the intrinsic moral value of that particular event. Where some lady, Winston Churchill, falls asleep in that position, it would have a moral value of, let's say on a scale of -10 to +10, I would say that's about a 0. But the consequences might not all be 0. That's the thing. And you have to know what the consequences are in order to know whether that event was just a gratuitous, meaningless event or not. You have to know what the consequences continue to unfold to the end of human history. And now we're finding out that, I hope you see that, wow, none of us are in that. So here's a little diagram. So the point down there is the initial event. This is the initial event, some random event that happens in the past. But of course, it leads to consequences and multiply exponentially out, affecting more causal chains and so forth. In order to know whether God should have allowed this one right here, you have to know the net moral value of every one of those other events, sum them all together, to see whether the whole thing turns out positive or negative. That's the kind of, and I got the idea for the book of Job, mind you. I can't believe nobody's written on this in philosophy. So that's what I did. So what is gratuitous or unjustified evil? There's an opening premise that you'll see arguments from atheism against the existence of God, and that is a perfectly good, all-powerful, and all-knowing God will not permit pointless or gratuitous evil. And gratuitous suffering is suffering that does not bring about a greater good or prevent a greater evil. It was just meaningless. And if it's suffering and it's meaningless, a perfectly good God would not permit that to happen. And therefore, there was no justification for that event. That would be a gratuitous suffering. Now, notice, to know if an event is gratuitous, one must know what I just pointed out here. The moral value of all the consequences of any event stretching into the future. But not just that, you also have to know the moral consequences of all the other possibilities that could have been actualized instead. So let's say I'm walking along, unkempt, vacant lot, I stub my toe on a rock, face plant into a pile of stinging nettles. You might think that that's a -1 or -2. But if while I'm doing my face plant, I see a raw, uncut, let's say 300-carat diamond, I'll take a face plant and it'll patch any day of the week if there's something like that waiting for me. It's not picking my face out of the nettles. So now it becomes, you see, this is what the philosophers all agree on, the atheist philosophers, that an evil event, God could allow that if in fact it brings about a greater good or prevents a greater evil. So this is all the stuff we need to know in order to know if God should or should not have allowed it. So here's the atheist argument from suffering. This is syllogism. Premise number one. So far as we can see, there appears to be plenty of gratuitous evil in this world, and I think we can all probably grant that. I have no idea why this or that is going on. So as far as I can see, there appears, emphasis on the word appears. Now, theirs is the next step. If it appears to be gratuitous, then it is gratuitous or unjustified. That's called an inductive move. It's really a probabilistic calculation goes on in your head to say, I don't see any reason why God will allow that, therefore there probably isn't a reason. And then you come to, it's a leap, but it's not an illogical leap. There's some justification for that leap because it appears to you that there's no point. And if that's the case, therefore, since God would not permit gratuitous unjustified evil, which we saw in the previous slide, therefore God does not exist. So if there's even one instance of unjustified evil in this world, God does not exist. That's the argument from suffering against the existence of God. Okay, this is, better take a swig of coffee if you got some, because you're going to be alert for this next slide or two. But let's let E, the letter E, represent an event where you break your leg, and let's let the moral value of any event take a value between -10 and +10, so you've just broken your leg. So let's say the value of that broken leg is a -5. You might say -5, I think it should be -10, but no, not -10. -10 is like somebody accidentally sets off a nuclear bomb in a city of 5 million people or something. That's a big minus right there. But you just broke your leg. And then there's another consequence. You got to wear a cast. It's uncomfortable. Let's put a -2 on that one. But then all your friends gather around, they show their sympathy, and you actually establish more firmer relationships. Let's put a +4 on that one. And then it goes on, and as you think, why did God allow me to break my leg? A few more events come, positive and negative. But then you realize, wait a sec, that thing that Kirk Durston talked about the other day, it's not just like 5 or 6 of consequences here. They're going to continue to multiply, and already they have, because these friends that came over didn't do what they would have been doing if they had to come over to see me with my broken leg. And so what would have they been doing, and how does that change the future? And it just goes multiple. So if you want to know the net moral value of breaking your leg, you have maybe 5 or 6 known values you can assign a moral value to. But you've got millions of other values, you have events that will occur as a result that you have no idea what the moral value of those will be, positive or negative. That's the problem that we run into when we try and figure out. Now, let's look at another, so you say, well, God, it would have been better if I had, let's say, I wake up in the morning and suddenly, what? Something really good happens, really good. I don't know, you just had an extra good sleep, some genetic phenomenon happened, and now you can run a 7-second 100-yard dash, which would blow everybody else in the world away. I would put a +8 on that one. And then as a result, you win all the Olympic medals, and that's another +5 right there, and +6, you get rich and famous for sponsoring stuff. But there's also millions of unknown variables you don't know about. So it starts off, look, and this is a way better idea. Rather than break my leg, let's do this genetic modification in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping. It looks like a way better idea, but unfortunately you don't know what all the long-term consequences of that will be for you and for the world and everybody else. So you still have millions of unknown values. So in order to know whether God should allow it or not, you have to take the best F that could possibly be, but not just the F and all its consequences at the end of history. You have to sum that all up, say, what's the best that God could have actualized instead of E? And then you take E minus F, and if E minus F is positive, that is, what that means is that breaking your leg was actually the best thing that could possibly have happened in the history of the world for this particular set of causal chains. But if F is bigger than E, and no, it wasn't the best. God should not allow me to break my leg. There was a better alternative over here. It's interesting that God says, God has a plan, and he says, because you did not carry out this plan, here was my plan to Israel. Everything was going to, all this good stuff. But because you did not wipe out the Canaanites completely, and that's a big question we're going to deal with tomorrow, wiping out the Canaanites, then you will learn war from now on to the end of human history. And if you know the history of Israel, war has been with it ever since. So, okay, so if somebody says, okay, what is E minus F? You get this exam. Okay, E equals a couple of known numbers and millions of unknown numbers, plus or minus. F means a few unknown numbers, even less, because you don't, it's kind of hard to imagine an imaginary event and then imaginary consequences that would actually happen, because it's not what you imagine, but what will actually happen to that. Okay, what's the answer? You've got, wow, like I got 12 known numbers here, and I got a couple of billion unknown numbers. What's your best answer? I would say your best answer is, I don't know. I don't know if this E minus F is positive or negative. Therefore, no human is in a position at all to know what God should or should not allow. That's the end. That was my first paper. And I want to tell you this because I want to kind of get you a little bit excited about how powerful this is. That's the approach God used on Job. That's what he used on Job. Now, I sent it off to Cambridge University's Journal for the Philosophy of Religion. And they not only published it, but I got a note from another philosopher a few months later. And he says, hey, do you know they put your paper on their home page? They like it so much. No, I didn't know that. Like, I almost feel like I plagiarized with the book of Job here. But and then another guy says, hey, you're in first year philosophy textbooks now. I'm telling you this so that you will get a better appreciation for the power of what God basically did with Job. We are in no position at all to know what God should allow, should not allow, and I didn't put this in my paper, you know, how you acknowledge your acknowledgement, but I didn't want to put God down there because they might, oh, like this guy's religious, you're out of here. So it's really God's approach to Job. Now what about, the problem is that there are billions of interacting causal chains, so it's not just one event. Here's one event, there's another event, there's another one that happens later on, geographically separated, time goes up like this, and here's an event that you thought you should delete, okay? And God gave you that, you can delete one event, one will delete, and he waits for your answer. You say, oh, this one here, that looks really bad, let's delete that. But did you notice that the consequences continue to spread, but not just spread, but they also begin to interact with these other exploding causal chains as well? Did you know that? And did you know that when you deleted this, you not only deleted this, but you changed the course of human history all in this area? Would you actually want that kind of power? I said, no, thank you. I would not want that kind of power. So preventing just one minor event has its own consequences that change the future. Bottom line, our knowledge is minuscule. And again, I refer to Job here. Clarification, our knowledge of the net moral value of any event, negative or positive, is so outrageously minuscule that we are in no position whatsoever to know what God should or should not allow. And that's basically all the arguments against God's existence from the problem of evil collapse right here, because every one of them assume we know enough about those events and their consequences to say God should not allow that. But what this shows is that no, we don't know enough, not even close. So when we think that God was not justified in allowing an event to occur, we assume that we know enough of the consequences to justify our opinion, and the reality is that we don't. We don't even have a beginning to grasp that question. We have no idea what God should and shouldn't allow. Here's another additional thought. As you know, every parent with children knows, and even you would know, like even if you're not a parent, you know that the older you get, the more life experience you get. You don't make the same decisions at 22 that you would have made when you were 12. Why? Because you know a little bit more at 22 than you did at 12, and the more wisdom and life experiences you gain, the more likely it is that you're going to make decisions that a 12-year-old would disagree with, because they don't have that information yet. Well, think about what that means for God. God is omniscient. He knows all that's logically possible to know. We know a minuscule amount, so chances are we're going to disagree a lot with what God decides. It's unimaginably enormous. Insights from the Bible. Let's start this, and then we'll finish. This is two seminars here, so we'll just start this. Now, I've just said, well, you have no idea what God should and should not allow, but sometimes he gives us little clues and hints and tidbits, and so this is what we're going to look at now. First of all, this life is not the main event. We get this from the scriptures. This life is not the main event. It's the dream before the awakening. God says, it's in the book of Isaiah, he will create a new heaven and the earth. And he says, and the former things will not come to mind, nor will they be remembered. I tend to suspect, I've thought a lot about this, that the only thing that really you will remember in this world is real love. Not fake love, not animal love, but real love. When I say animal love, I'm talking about what you see in the movies. That guy likes that going over there, and next thing you know, they're going at it over there in bed. That's what I call it. That's not love. That's not what you remember. What you will remember is the true love relationship. So I infer from that, I will know my wife in eternity. Whether I remember she was my wife or not, I don't know. But the love that we have in this world, love is the most important thing to God. He says that's the greatest thing you can do, and he loves us. And so it seems to me it's a divine thing. Real love is divine, and you'll remember that. So, but this life is not the main event. It is kind of like an airport. And the objective is not to stay in the airport as long as possible, but to get to your destination. From God's perspective, the sooner you get to the destination, the better. So our mission in life, as I've said before, is to prepare to meet God and help others do the same. This whole life is just preparing for eternity. And when that mission is accomplished, then it is time to go. And how old you are, or how much of your so-called earthly potential you fulfilled, is actually not relevant. What is relevant is, have you fulfilled the mission that God had for you in this life? And that mission is fulfilled in individual ways. Whatever your career is, your neighbors are, wherever you find yourself, this is the part of the mission. It's not, I'm not talking in other words about full-time missions here. That might be part of it, but for most people, it's the career, the neighborhood, the school friends. All of this is part of the mission. God sees people differently from us. So when I see a little toddler, I mean, that's one of the reasons we didn't want to quit having kids, because those toddlers are just so cute. You just want to pick them up and hug them, and they just say the cutest things. We see an innocent child, but God is I am. He spans time. He doesn't see the child as just, oh, that's a cute little toddler. He sees that child at the moment they're conceived. They're 2 years old, they're 20 years old, they're 40 years old, they're 80 years old. It's all in one fell swoop. He sees that person as the entirety of their life. So you would say, why would God take that little toddler? Well, God sees the entirety of their life. He knows what mission and so on and so forth. And there is a time, like we have 13 grandkids, but one is already in eternity. But the thing that takes away the sting is, and when I got the news, I felt a big emptiness, but at the same time, I felt almost an exhilaration of peace and joy, because I know that I will see her again. So, for some reason, there's a lot of little people in this world, and God knows their mission is, they're ready for eternity, and I'm taking them. So, that's something you got to realize. God sees people a lot differently than we see people. So we're going to quit there for 10 minutes, come back at 10 o'clock, and we'll continue with insight number 1 from the scriptures.
He's kind of